Your savings account is being drained right now. While you sleep, while you scroll, while you convince yourself everything is fine. $850 billion, not a forecast, not a possibility. A weapon already loaded, safety off, barrel pointed directly at everything you've worked for. The hand holding that weapon belongs to Beijing, and this morning, they squeezed the trigger again. You didn't hear the shot because this war doesn't make noise. It makes math, and the math just turned lethal. They told you this was conspiracy theory nonsense. They said the bond market was too big to fail, too stable to crack, too essential to collapse. They lied. Or maybe they just didn't understand what happens when the world's two largest economies stop pretending to be friends and start acting like enemies preparing for war. What you're witnessing isn't an economic adjustment or a market correction. It's a controlled demolition of the financial architecture that's held your standard of living together for your entire life. The mortgage rate you're seeing isn't following normal rules anymore. It's detaching from reality, floating upward like a balloon with a cut string, and the Federal Reserve is standing on the ground, watching it disappear into the clouds with absolutely nothing they can do to pull it back down. 7% interest rates felt painful. What's coming next will feel like amputation without anesthesia. The largest creditor on the planet just walked away from the negotiating table, and they didn't just walk away empty-handed. They're taking everything with them and setting fire to what they can't carry. To understand why your purchasing power is about to evaporate, you need to see past the headlines that most analysts parrot without thinking. They'll quote you one number, the official figure for Chinese holdings of Standard Treasury securities, somewhere around $760 billion. That number is a lie by omission. When you add in agency debt, the massive entities like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that guarantee your neighbor's mortgage and prop up the housing market, the real number explodes to $850 billion. This is the leverage Beijing has been quietly accumulating over decades. This is their nuclear option, and they're activating it right now. For 20 years, we had an arrangement that felt like magic. China manufactured everything: electronics, furniture, clothes, toys, tools. They sent those goods across the Pacific, and we paid them in dollars. Then something crucial happened that most people never noticed. China took those dollars and recycled them right back into our debt markets. They bought treasury bonds, which is just a fancy way of saying they loaned us our own money back. This kept interest rates artificially suppressed in America. It kept their currency cheap so they could keep exporting. It was the greatest financial symbiosis in human history, and it subsidized the entire American middle-class lifestyle. Your cheap television, your affordable car loan, your low mortgage payment, all of it was quietly funded by this arrangement. But the arrangement just died. The trade war that erupted in early 2026 didn't just raise prices on imports. It severed the financial umbilical cord connecting the two economies. When Washington slapped 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, they sent a message that Chinese money was no longer welcome. Beijing received that message and responded with cold precision. They stopped recycling dollars into treasury debt. Instead, they started selling, dumping their holdings faster than any time since the chaos of 2015. This isn't random. This isn't some automatic portfolio rebalancing by a computer algorithm. This is a strategic decision made in smoke-filled rooms by people who understand exactly what levers to pull to inflict maximum damage on an adversary. They're converting paper promises from a hostile government into physical gold, the hardest asset on earth, something that can't be printed, can't be sanctioned, can't be frozen by some bureaucrat in Washington with a phone call. China has been buying gold for 28 consecutive months. That's not diversification, that's preparation. They watched what happened to Russia in 2022 when Western governments froze hundreds of billions in Russian reserves overnight with a keystroke. China is ensuring that weapon can never be used against them. They're moving out of assets denominated in dollars and into assets that exist independent of any government's permission. But here's where the story turns from concerning to catastrophic for you personally. The problem isn't that China is buying gold. The problem is that nobody is replacing China as the buyer of the bonds they're selling. The United States government doesn't operate on balanced budgets. It operates on deficit spending to the tune of $2 trillion every single year. That means every single year, the government spends $2 trillion more than it collects in taxes. To cover that gap, the Treasury Department has to go out into the market every single week and auction off billions in new bonds. It's like paying your credit card bill by opening a new credit card. The scheme only works if someone keeps giving you new credit cards. For years, China was the guaranteed buyer at those auctions. They showed up with a blank check. Now they're not only absent from the auction, they're actively selling their old bonds back onto the market at the same time the Treasury is trying to sell new ones. This creates what's called a supply shock. Imagine every house in your neighborhood going up for sale on the same day with zero buyers. prices collapse instantly. Bonds work the same way. When supply overwhelms demand, the price craters. And here's the critical mechanism you need to understand because it will determine whether you can afford a house for the rest of your life. In the bond market, price and yield move in opposite directions like a seesaw. When the price of a bond collapses, the interest rate, the yield, shoots upward automatically. This is why rates are spiking even though inflation is supposedly cooling down. The market knows something the headlines won't tell you. There is no marginal buyer left. The Federal Reserve is doing what they call quantitative tightening, which means they're selling bonds, not buying them. American banks are stuffed full of government debt and sitting on catastrophic unrealized losses. Japan is desperately trying to save its own collapsing currency by selling treasuries. That leaves exactly one buyer left to fund the government's spending addiction. You, the American investor. But to convince you to buy a 10-year bond that pays you back in continuously devaluing dollars, the government has to bribe you with a much higher interest rate. This creates a crowding out effect that forces borrowing costs higher across the entire economy. Every loan, every credit card, every car payment gets more expensive. But the most direct impact hits your home. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate tracks the 10-year Treasury yield with mathematical precision. If China's selling campaign pushes that yield to 6%, mortgage rates will hit 9%. Not maybe, not possibly. They will hit 9%. It's arithmetic, not opinion. We're watching something that shouldn't be possible according to everything you were taught in economics class. We're watching a complete decoupling. The mortgage rate is divorcing itself from the Federal Reserve's control. Think about what that means. You've been conditioned to believe the Fed sits in a control room with levers and buttons that steer the economy. That's a comforting fiction. The Fed only controls short-term overnight lending rates between banks. The market controls long-term rates, the rates that actually matter for your mortgage and your car loan. The Fed could hold a press conference tomorrow and cut their rate to zero. And if China simultaneously dumps $50 billion in bonds that afternoon, your mortgage rate will rise, not fall. This completely neutralizes the Federal Reserve's power. It breaks their ability to rescue the housing market. We've entered a new regime that economists call fiscal dominance, which in plain language means the size of the debt mountain matters more than interest rate policy. The pile of IOUs is so enormous now that it has its own gravity, and that gravity is pulling everything down. Make no mistake, this is warfare. It's not fought with aircraft carriers or missiles. It's fought with balance sheets and bond auctions. The Chinese government knows exactly where America is vulnerable. They know the American middle class has built its entire sense of wealth on rising home values. They know real estate is the engine that drives consumer spending, and consumer spending is 70% of the economy. By forcing interest rates to stay elevated, they can engineer a depression in the United States without firing a single bullet. It's asymmetric warfare. They're using America's debt addiction as the weapon. The timing isn't coincidental. This lines up perfectly with the semiconductor sanctions. Washington told Beijing they couldn't have access to advanced computer chips, cutting off their access to NVIDIA's best technology. So Beijing retaliated in the place where America is most exposed. You banned our chips. We're banning your credit. The difference is China can survive without cutting-edge graphics processors for a few years. The American economy cannot survive with 9% mortgage rates for even a few months without collapsing into rubble. Look at commercial real estate. Office towers sitting empty, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy because companies can't afford to refinance their loans. If foreign selling spikes rates even higher, that's the final blow. Trillions of dollars in real estate value will simply vanish. The U.S. Treasury is trapped with no good options. They have two choices, and both lead to disaster. Option 1, force the Federal Reserve to restart the money printers. Print trillions of new dollars to buy all the bonds that China is selling. If they do that, inflation doesn't just return, it explodes. Your grocery bill doubles again. Gas hits $8 a gallon. They would be destroying the currency to bail out a foreign adversary. Option 2, do nothing. Let rates rise, let banks fail, let the housing market collapse, and suffer a deflationary depression that makes 2008 look like a minor inconvenience. This is the choice Beijing has engineered. Heads they win, tails you lose. You're probably looking at your own portfolio right now wondering where money is supposed to go. If cash is being destroyed by inflation and real estate is crashing, where do you hide? But before you can protect anything, you need to understand the ghost in this machine. You need to know about the secret accounts that hide the real damage. The data shows China is masking their selling through middlemen, using custodian banks in Belgium and Luxembourg to hide how much they're actually dumping. The official number says $760 billion in holdings. The real number is probably much lower because they're selling in secret through proxy accounts. Every time the bond market has a rally, they use that as cover to sell more. This puts a concrete ceiling on bond prices, which means there's an iron floor under interest rates. The days of 3% mortgages are gone permanently. They're not coming back in your lifetime. We're reverting to the historical norm, and that norm is brutal. For 40 years, America had a VIP pass to cheap money. That pass has been revoked. Now we pay full price, and you're the one paying it. You pay it in higher credit card interest that compounds monthly. You pay it in car loans that make vehicles unaffordable. You're paying a geopolitical tax every single month, whether you realize it or not. The American standard of living was built on cheap foreign capital. That capital has been withdrawn. We're watching 4 decades of globalization unravel in 4 years. The bond vigilantes have returned, but this time they're not nervous investors worried about inflation. They're state actors selling bonds specifically to inflict pain. And that pain is about to cascade into corporate America. Major corporations borrowed money at near zero rates in 2020 and 2021. Those loans are coming due now. They have to refinance at rates 3 times higher. Imagine your mortgage payment tripling overnight. That's what's happening to companies with billions in debt. This will cause bankruptcies, mass layoffs, and a stock market that suddenly realizes the Fed can't save them this time. The stock market is still partying like everything is fine, betting that the Fed will ride to the rescue. But the bond market knows the truth. The Fed is being held hostage by the sheer volume of debt hitting the system. We're watching a slow-motion collapse in the plumbing of the financial system. There used to be a safety valve called the reverse repo facility, essentially a giant pool of cash that absorbed shocks and provided liquidity when the system got stressed. That pool held over $2 trillion at its peak. It's empty now, completely drained. There are no shock absorbers left. If we hit a serious bump, the axle breaks. We could see a flash crash in treasuries, where yields spike massively in a single session. If that happens, it breaks all the leverage in the derivatives market. Margin calls trigger globally. Banks that looked safe yesterday are insolvent today. The entire system is fragile, leveraged to the absolute limit, and now it's under sustained attack from the second largest player in the game. This is why smart money is moving. Billionaires and family offices are quietly repositioning. They see the bond market fracturing. They're getting out of the blast radius. They're moving into assets that cannot be printed by a government, cannot be devalued by a committee, cannot be seized by a politician with a pen. Gold, farmland, productive commodities. These are the only safe harbors remaining. For 40 years, financial advisors told you the same thing. Put 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. They called it the balanced portfolio. That strategy is dead. It died in 2022, but nobody told you. Why? Because bonds used to be your insurance policy. When stocks fell, bonds rose. They protected you. But now bonds aren't protection. They're the source of the danger. They're the epicenter of the earthquake. Holding long-term government bonds used to be called risk-free. Now it's a gamble on global peace. And if you glance at headlines from the South China Sea or Taiwan, peace is not what's brewing. The $850 billion sell order isn't a future threat. It's happening right now, this week, this month. The dollar is being strangled by the very nations that helped build it into the reserve currency. But you need to understand the exact mechanics of how this explosion will unfold. Financial plumbing is boring until the pipes burst and flood your house. Then it's the only thing that matters. Right now, a critical valve has failed. The reverse repo facility that once held over $2 trillion in emergency cash is completely empty. Think of it like a water tank that prevents pressure spikes in your home's plumbing. For 2 years, that tank was full. It allowed the Treasury to borrow enormous sums without breaking the market. It kept rates stable. That cushion no longer exists. Every single dollar the government borrows now has to come directly from the banking system, from your bank's reserves. This is the worst possible timing. We're hitting this liquidity cliff at the exact moment China is dumping $850 billion in bonds. It's like running out of gas while driving up a mountain, and at that precise moment, someone slashes your tires. Without that buffer, banks are scrambling for cash, putting immense pressure on regional banks. Remember Silicon Valley Bank and how fast it collapsed in 2023? That was the preview. Now we're watching the main event. American banks are sitting on over $600 billion in unrealized losses right now, according to FDIC data. That's $600 billion that simply vanished when interest rates rose. But banks don't have to recognize those losses as long as they don't sell the bonds. They can pretend everything is fine, hiding the losses on their balance sheets. But if you get scared and go to the ATM to withdraw your money, the bank has to pay you. To get that cash, they're forced to sell those underwater bonds. When they sell, they lock in the loss. The bank goes bust instantly. This is exactly what killed Silicon Valley Bank, and now the risk is everywhere. China knows this. By selling bonds and forcing rates higher, they're making the hole in every bank's balance sheet bigger. It's a deliberate attack on the capital base of the American banking system. Beijing understands that banks are the Achilles heel. If banks can't lend, businesses can't expand. If businesses can't expand, the economy grinds to a halt. The Federal Reserve is trapped. They've lost their magic wand. In 2023, they launched a rescue program called the Bank Term Funding Program that saved the system temporarily. That program has expired. It's gone. Now the Fed faces a binary choice. Let the banks fail and watch ATMs go dark, or print trillions to cover the losses and destroy the dollar through inflation. Both options end in catastrophe for the average person. But the attack isn't just happening in bond markets. It's happening in energy markets simultaneously, and this part should terrify you most. For 50 years, the world operated under an arrangement called the petrodollar. If anyone anywhere wanted to buy oil, they had to use US dollars first. If France wanted oil from Saudi Arabia, France had to buy American dollars before buying the oil. This created permanent global demand for dollars. It forced every nation to hold our currency. That era is ending. China is the world's largest oil customer now, and they're paying for oil in yuan, using currency swap arrangements with Saudi Arabia and other producers. They're bypassing the dollar entirely, cutting out the middleman. The middleman is us. This reduces global dollar demand right when we desperately need people buying dollars to fund our deficits. For the first time in 50 years, Saudi Arabia is openly accepting other currencies. They're cheating on their marriage to the dollar. This destroys what economists call America's exorbitant privilege, essentially a magic credit card that let us run up infinite debt without consequences because everyone needed our currency. That credit card just got declined. If the world needs fewer dollars to buy energy, they have zero reason to hold treasury bonds. This shift isn't accidental. It synchronizes perfectly with China's bond selling. It's a pincer movement, a classic military tactic. China is attacking from two sides simultaneously. From the supply side, by dumping bonds, and from the demand side, by eliminating the need for dollars in energy transactions. They're squeezing the dollar to death from both ends. The impact is already visible in markets. Investors are demanding higher and higher yields to hold U.S. debt because they realize the terrifying truth. The government has no plan except to borrow new money to pay interest on old money. In criminal enterprises, that's called a Ponzi scheme. In Washington, they call it fiscal policy. But Ponzi schemes only function as long as new money keeps flowing in. When your biggest investor calls your bluff and walks away, the whole structure unravels. We're seeing failed auctions where the Treasury tries to sell debt and nobody shows up. Primary dealers, the big banks required to buy, are being forced to absorb unwanted bonds. Their balance sheets are clogged with this debt. This creates a liquidity trap. It's like trying to sell your house, but every door and window has been nailed shut. You can't escape. In this environment, any sudden shock, a war over Taiwan, a banking crisis in Europe, could cause the entire bond market to seize up instantly. And here's the truly scary part. U.S. Treasuries are the collateral for the entire global financial system. If the Treasury market freezes, everything freezes. ATMs stop dispensing cash, credit cards stop working, payroll systems fail. The Federal Reserve is terrified of this scenario. They're quietly talking about slowing down their own bond sales. But that's a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. It doesn't fix the real problem. The real problem is simple. The government spends too much money and relied on adversaries to lend the cash to fund that spending. Now the adversaries have stopped lending. The spending must be paid for with inflation, a stealth tax nobody voted for but everyone pays. You pay it at the gas station, you pay it at the grocery store, you pay it when insurance premiums double. China is forcing America to choose between hyperinflation and depression. They're betting that American politicians are weak, that they'll choose inflation every time to avoid pain today, even if it destroys the country tomorrow. History suggests that's a very safe bet. So here's what happens next. The Federal Reserve will eventually panic and pivot. They'll restart the printing presses. They'll give it some technical name like market functioning support or yield curve control. Don't be fooled. It's money printing. This temporarily saves the banks but destroys the currency. We're looking at a future where the dollar loses purchasing power faster and faster. This is why the stock market keeps rising even as everything gets more expensive. But be very careful here. The stock market isn't rising because companies are selling more products or earning higher profits. It's the Venezuela dynamic. In Venezuela, the stock market went up millions of percent while people starved because the currency became worthless. If bread costs 1 million bolivars, the bakery's stock price looks amazing. But you're still starving. That's happening to American markets. Stocks rise in nominal dollar terms because the dollar is collapsing against real assets. Investors are fleeing cash, moving into anything that holds value. But the supposedly safe asset of the last 40 years, the Treasury bond, is now the danger zone. Stocks and bonds are falling together, destroying the balanced portfolio. China has exposed the weakness of the entire Western financial system. They've shown the world that the so-called risk-free rate is actually full of risk. Now other nations are copying them. The BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are building alternative payment systems to bypass the dollar completely. They're hoarding gold at unprecedented rates. They're preparing for a new world order where trade settles in hard assets, not paper promises printed by governments. The United States is finding itself isolated. We used to dominate. Now we're losing influence, and the American consumer is left holding the bag. Your standard of living was artificially elevated because the dollar was king. As the king loses the crown, imports become expensive. Purchasing power evaporates. But there is a way to protect yourself. Certain assets historically survive currency collapses. You need to position yourself before panic starts. But first, understand the doom loop forming in housing right now. Go to any store and look at prices. Electronics, clothing, furniture. The China price is dead. For 20 years, cheap Chinese manufacturing kept your cost of living suppressed. That era is over, replaced by what we might call the war price. Companies are frantically moving factories out of China to Vietnam, Mexico, other locations. Politicians call it friendshoring. It sounds nice. It's expensive. We're moving from efficiency to security, from just-in-time delivery to just-in-case inventory. Safety costs money. You're paying that cost. The U.S. economy is 70% consumer spending. If spending stops, everything collapses. Right now, people keep spending only because they feel wealthy. Their home value went up. Their stock portfolio looks healthy. Economists call this the wealth effect. Here's the nightmare. If China crashes the bond market, mortgage rates hit 9%. If rates hit 9%, housing prices crash. If housing crashes, the wealth effect disappears. People stop spending. The economy freezes. This triggers what central bankers fear most, the doom loop. Crashing bonds lead to crashing real estate. That causes recession. Recession means lower tax revenue. Lower revenue means bigger deficits. To fund deficits, government sells more bonds. Selling more bonds crashes prices again. It's a death spiral, and China is feeding it deliberately. Every bond they sell accelerates the cycle. It's calculated. It's like a medieval siege, cutting off supplies to the fortress. Inside the fortress, authorities are lying to you, gaslighting the public. They say the economy is strong while the foundation crumbles. Look at jobs reports. They release impressive headlines, then quietly revise the numbers down 2 months later when nobody's watching, admitting the jobs never existed. GDP growth is fake, driven entirely by government deficit spending, not real productive output. We're borrowing money to create the illusion of growth. The math is broken. For every dollar of new debt, we get less than $1 of growth in return. We're spending $1 to get 50 cents back. That's a guaranteed losing trade. Now that interest rates have tripled, the credit card bill is due. Interest payments on national debt are growing exponentially. Soon they'll consume the entire federal budget. No money for infrastructure, education, anything. Every tax dollar you pay will service debt or fund entitlements. This is the straitjacket China has created. There's no room to maneuver. If recession hits now, the government cannot rescue you without completely destroying the currency. We're flying without a parachute and the ground is rushing up fast. The bond market is that ground. It's hard, unforgiving, and doesn't care about hopes or feelings. The bond vigilantes are back and they want their pound of flesh. That flesh comes from your retirement account. The great wealth transfer isn't conspiracy theory. It's mechanical. When government can't pay bills with taxes, it pays with inflation. Inflation taxes your savings without your vote. You work for dollars. You save dollars. Government prints dollars for free. Every time they print, yours are worth less. They're diluting your labor, stealing your time. China understands perfectly. That's why they're leaving. They refuse to hold currency destined to devalue. They're not alone. The smartest money globally is running for exits. We're witnessing a slow-motion bank run on the dollar itself, happening at the highest levels. Central banks worldwide are buying more gold than any time in 50 years. They're not buying gold because it's shiny. They're buying because it's the only neutral asset remaining. In a world of financial warfare, gold cannot be frozen by sanctions. It's the only money that doesn't depend on another government's promise. The People's Bank of China leads this charge, converting trade surpluses into physical bullion. They're preparing for a post-dollar world where you don't pay with promises, but with things that have inherent value. There's an economic principle called Gresham's Law. Bad money drives out good money. Right now, the dollar is bad money. We're printing to infinity. Gold is good money, and nations that actually produce things are hoarding it. Ignore what bankers say in public. Watch what they do. In press conferences, they call gold a barbaric relic. Then they return to vaults and stack bars faster than ever. They're lying, front-running the collapse. The old rules are dead. The 60-40 portfolio is a zombie. For 40 years, bonds were your safety net. If stocks crashed, bonds rose. In an inflation crisis, that safety net vanishes. Stocks and bonds crash together. There's nowhere to hide. We saw a preview in 2022. We're about to see the full catastrophe. Holding Treasury bonds today isn't risk-free return. It's return-free risk. Look at the math. You get paid 5% interest while inflation eats 7% of purchasing power. You're locking in guaranteed loss, paying them to lose your money. Where does smart money go when dollars burn? You run to hard assets, things that cannot be printed, things politicians cannot destroy with signatures. Productive farmland, energy infrastructure, industrial metals like copper and lithium, gold. These have real value. They survive because civilization needs them. China is doing exactly this, on a global shopping spree, buying copper mines in Africa, farmland in South America, converting dying dollars into real dirt and real metal before music stops. Look at your own net worth honestly. How much is real? If everything sits in bank accounts or retirement funds, you're vulnerable. You're naked, holding the bag for government debt. The everything bubble was built on cheap credit. The everything bust will be caused by expensive credit. It's gravity. If interest rates stay at 6%, stock prices must come down. The math doesn't support current valuations. A reversion to mean is coming, painful for anyone unprepared. This is why billionaires are selling tech stocks, buying land and gold, moving down the risk pyramid closer to reality. They know speculative assets get wiped out in this environment. You need to become your own central bank, holding reserves outside the system. Here's the most important rule for the next decade. If you cannot touch it, you don't own it. If you own gold ETF in your portfolio, you don't own gold. You own paper, a promise from a bank. If the system crashes, they pay you in worthless cash. They call it force majeure. It's legal and they will do it. China understands. They take physical delivery. They don't leave gold in London or New York anymore. They bring it home. This drains the vaults, creating a squeeze. Soon we'll see price splits, two prices for gold, the paper price on television and the real price you pay to get a coin in hand. Premiums will explode. We're already seeing this in silver markets. The market screams that paper prices are lies. The same danger applies to housing. Real estate is a hard asset wrapped in a debt bomb. If you own your home free and clear, congratulations, that's an inflation hedge. But if you carry a massive mortgage, that house is a liability, a trap. Even with fixed 30-year rate, you have problems. Insurance is skyrocketing. Property taxes exploding. These act like variable rates you cannot control. It gets worse. Local governments are broke. Commercial real estate collapse destroyed their tax revenue. Empty office towers don't pay taxes. Cities must find money elsewhere. They're coming for homeowners, raising property taxes aggressively to fill budget holes. Your home transforms from asset into tax farm for government. It's not the perfect shield it was decades ago. You must be smarter, more agile. You need liquidity. But in crisis, liquidity doesn't mean cash. Cash is trash. Liquidity means owning assets anyone anywhere will accept. Gold is the only asset liquid in every country, every currency, every crisis. Its universal language of value requires no translation, no electricity. It works in blackouts. It works in wars. This is why China buys it. It's their insurance policy, building a great wall of gold to protect their economy. You need the same. Build a wall around your family. Don't wait for Federal Reserve signals. They'll never tell you to panic. By the time they admit crisis, it's too late. Gates will be closed. They'll try locking you into the system, which is where central bank digital currency comes in. The ultimate trap, allowing them to track every penny you spend, stopping you from buying gold, imposing negative interest rates where they simply take money from your account for saving it. This is the end game. Financial repression. They need you trapped in dollars so they can inflate away their debt. If you exit the dollar, you defeat their strategy, so they'll try stopping you. But right now, the door remains open. You can still convert digital numbers into tangible assets. No penalties, no restrictions, yet. This window won't stay open forever. The $850 billion sell order from China is just the first domino. It knocks over the bond market, then stocks, then the currency itself. We're watching the death of the old system. Transition will be chaotic, volatile, but wealth is never destroyed. It just transfers from hands of unprepared to hands of prepared, from oblivious creditor to smart owner. You have a choice. Will you be the creditor paid in worthless paper? Or will you be the owner holding things the world actually needs? China made its bet against the dollar, betting on laws of mathematics. Look at the math yourself. Do you really want to be on the other side of that bet? The storm isn't coming. It's here, overhead. The roof is leaking. Build your ark now and load it with what's real, because the water is rising faster than anyone is willing to admit.